Hello. Some of you have been following me for a while, friends, family. Some of you have never met. A lot of people have asked me questions about the canvas preparation process, so I thought it might be neat to do a little short video on that. I'm going to have to do some time-lapse stuff because it is time-consuming, but I thought I'd go into at least some of the process, which might help some of you understand what goes into these paintings before I even paint a stroke with a brush. There's usually between 2 to 6 hours of work that goes in depending on the type of canvas I use, the type of surface, or the size. And so, of course, the first thing we've got to have is a flat work surface, which you will need. This is an old drop leaf table that my dad actually found dumped off on the parking lot of his old business. I inherited it. We stripped everything off the top of it. It's messy, but it works for what I need it for. Even though it does have streaks of paint and stuff on top of it, I still like to use a piece of paper to kind of cover up where I'm going to be working. You'll also want to probably roll up your sleeves and try not to get anything on your pants. If you need to use an apron or whatever, please do, because it can be a messy process. And you may hear kids in the background because it's Christmas right now. We've got family in town, they're running around, but I've told them to try to be a little quiet because they know I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to start today with a pre-stretched 8x10 canvas. This is a store-bought canvas. It's standard stretch canvas. It's double primed, it's cotton. A lot of these come like this. They say that they're ready to paint on. The surface is still pretty rough, if you can see it. The front of it has been coated in the factory with 2 coats of gesso. That's what they mean by double primed. A lot of people will buy these and they'll paint directly on them, and they will say, well, you know, I'm painting, but I can't get the detail that some people seem to get. Well, that's because the canvas is not properly prepared. Now, one of the things that you're going to see if you were to feel this canvas, there's a ridge that runs around on the stretcher bars, and it pulls the canvas away from the bars ever so slightly. You can see that little gap there. Now, with what we're going to do, we're going to be putting a special coating on here. And you have to brace the back of this, otherwise the line that's caused by this ridge will build up higher than the rest of the canvas. It makes it difficult to frame. It also just doesn't look good. And so what I have done, before I started filming, I went and I cut an old roofing tin sheet. I measured this out, the gap between these pieces of wood, and it's about 8.5 by 6.5. Back here. So I cut this at 8x6, and what you'll do is you'll figure out which side of this is the smoothest, because that is important, and you'll drop this in and you'll slide it into the gap between the ridge and the canvas, and you got to get a good tight fit, and this will help you avoid the ridge, because now this is all pulled out straight. You'll see it's flat. I can't push down into it anymore like I could earlier. The other thing that I have discovered, especially on larger canvases, is that you still have a little bit of give right here. So you want something that will have a little bit of give to it, and I've discovered that a standard kitchen sponge, this is just one of those Ocello kitchen sponges that you can buy pretty much at any grocery store, is a pretty good prop that you can just stick that right there like that, and it'll hold it up. Now, when you start doing the prep process, you're going to have to keep in mind where this piece of metal stops, because you don't want to work all the way up to that edge. You want to be able to keep your surface smooth. We have to work pretty quickly when we do this, because we're going to be using an acrylic-based substance, and the acrylic dries within about 5 minutes. So you've got to work quickly. Other things that you'll need, most likely, would be a roll of paper towels. I cut the paper towels in half to about the size of a toilet paper roll. This actually helps you conserve paper towels, because when you peel it off and you fold it up and you wipe things off with it, you really only use about half the towel anyway. This way you stretch your towels out much further. The other thing that I've discovered is good for this is a cake frosting spatula. There are other much more expensive palette knives and things that you can buy, but these are like $2.50 at most grocery stores or at Walmart. It works just as well, gives you a smooth surface. And then this doesn't look like what it says it is because I recycled this bottle. What this is that's in here is a mix of gesso and modeling paste. Modeling paste comes in a container like that. Liquitex makes a good modeling paste. It's chunky. It's used for building up texture on canvas surfaces. A lot of people that want to get that thick, what they call an impasto look, where you have really texturized paint when you're not working with oil but acrylic, they'll build it up with this and then paint over it, and it'll look like the thick oil paint. You do a 50-50 mix. So this is half modeling paste and half gesso. I have it marked 50-50 on there so that I don't confuse it with the actual modeling paint, with the actual gesso. You can buy gesso in big buckets. This is a pretty large bucket, but it comes, you can get it in a 5-gallon bucket. I just don't have room for it in my small little in-house studio. And so the next thing that we will do is I'll shake this up, and you want to try to keep it mixed. When the modeling paste sits by itself, you've got to keep the lid on it as tightly as possible because it doesn't have a very long shelf life. It'll harden up on you, and then you'll get little chunks in it, and it takes more time to sand it down. And I'm glad I mentioned that because one step that I did almost forget, if I forget a step, it's usually this one, is that the first thing we want to do is lightly sand the surface of the canvas. Sometimes there are little knots, little snags that form in the cotton weave, and that'll knock them off. You don't want to sand too hard because you don't want to tear the canvas. You're just trying to make sure that you've knocked anything off of it. Now, if I was being super diligent, I would go in to show y'all what I also do around the edges, but I'm going to cut for right now. What I'm going to be doing is taking a roll of blue painter's tape and taping off the edge. Okay, so now I've taped the edges of the canvas off. Trying to make sure that I keep a consistent, constant, straight line all the way around. I used 4 pieces of tape rather than trying to make the corners go all the way around and keep it straight. That way I'm able to line up one corner with another corner. So I did the short sides first and then the long sides, and then you fold it over the back. This gives you some area to grab a hold of when you want to peel it off. Now if you do this, it's going to give you a nice clean edge when you finish your surface prep. But if you leave this on too long, it is going to make the wood a little bit tacky. So you want to try to work quickly. Of course, if you were doing this for a living, you would want to work quickly because what's the old saying? Time is money. Well, that's true in painting as well. You may also want to use a smaller palette knife or even one of these Bob Ross style knives. This is what he always used for painting mountains. There are drawbacks to using thinner knives. When you start applying the surface prep and you go like this with it, you're going to have a straight line at the edge of every pass that you make. And when you try to work it out, then you'd end up making 2 lines. That's why I've gotten where I try to use the largest knife possible. So we will see how this goes. So we take this 50-50 mix, again, modeling paste and gesso, and I've tinted this a slight gray color. That's going to help me see it up against the white surface. And remember, keep in mind where your metal plate is, because you don't want to work past that too much. I like these containers. That's why I've repurposed this container over and over again, because you can just kind of squirt this out right on there and then just slowly begin spreading it, almost like you're buttering a piece of bread. You want to try, as I've said before, you want to try to work quickly. Depending on the resolution of the screen that you're watching this on, you may see some little brown streaks that have shown up. That's leftover acrylic paint from when I actually tinted this. The gray color that I used is a mix of brown and blue, and you end up with this nice gray when you mix it with the white gesso. And so there we go. Okay, so now this has had time to dry. I'll try to show a close-up of it. You can see that there's some streaks. The canvas weave is still visible, but it's not as visible as it was. It's also toned down that lighter gray color and gives it a nice surface. Now we're going to leave this piece of metal in here for the next step. This is when the sponge really comes in handy, because you're going to be pushing down on this. So what you're going to do is you're going to need either a sanding block or one of these sanding sponges that has a minimum of 320 grit. That's very, very smooth. And what you're going to do is wet the surface, and then you're going to start sanding on it. I tend to keep one of these little spray bottles, or depending on what generation you're from, atomizers. And what you're going to do is just spray the surface and sand in a circular motion. This will give you a little bit of a view right there of how smooth this becomes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sand the entire surface, and then we are once again going to go back over it with the surface treatment, wait for it to dry, sand it again. Usually have to do this a minimum of 4 times. Typically it takes between 6 to 8 times to get the surface of the canvas down to where you really want it to be, which is almost a plate finish. I will break back in here for just a moment to remind you that you've got this piece of metal behind your canvas. You don't want to sand past it. The same way it reacts and makes a slight line when you are putting the surface prep on, it'll do the same thing when you're sanding it, and you'll end up with this line that will actually transfer to subsequent layers. It'll get thicker and thicker and thicker, and it can be a nightmare to get rid of it. And I know that because I've had to face it. I learned it the hard way, so I'm trying to pass it on to you so you can avoid it. The other thing is this will gum up your sanding block. If you're using these sponges, I like these because you can reuse them, and they tend to soak up some of the water on the sides, so it's less messy, but you will have to wash these with extremely hot water between each use. Eventually you will wear down the surface and there won't be any abrasiveness left on it, but these are my preference for right now. I tried a sanding block with the type of paper that you attach to it, and I kept snagging on the edges as I would pull it over and tearing the paper, and I had to change the paper a lot more often than I have found that I have to switch these out, so I continue to use these. So now we do a little bit of a different angle on this. You can get a better look at it. You can see how the light reflects off of it. It almost blows out your screen, but you can see how this is getting smoother. There's still some roughness to it, and we have to wait for the water to dry. This is an acrylic primer, an acrylic-based primer. And so until it sets up for about 24 to 48 hours, you can add water to it. It sort of reactivates it. Now once it's dry, it will be firm enough to put your oil paint over, and you don't have to worry about any kind of degradation. It will be permanent. It's considered a suitable support for oil paint, so you don't have to worry about it going away. You don't have to worry about your paint peeling over time, and it also is really good for this surface preparation. Now when we go in to do the next layer of the surface prep, we're going to turn the canvas and we're going to go in a different direction. So when I first started this, you'll notice I went this way. So now we're going to go up and down. So you're going to go widthwise and then lengthwise, widthwise, lengthwise. You're going to alternate every time. My painting mentor, when he developed this technique, he started out doing this with a brush, and he would brush one direction, let that dry, sand it, brush another direction, sand it. Now, using the palette knives is a little bit faster, but the multi-directional application still helps in the long run because you get a good, smooth, even coating. And that's what you want. You want this is eventually going to be as flat as you can make it. And the best way to do that is to do this one way and then the other, and that way you're building up crisscross layers, so eventually there are no streaks, there are no sags, there are no low spots. It's all even. So as I go into the next step, one of the things that you may notice, even in the time-lapse video, is that you may see me pick up either of these smaller knives. If I do that, I'm not going against what I said earlier. What I find happens sometimes is with this big knife, it's flat, but it is somewhat pliable, even though it's heavy. And sometimes, either because of the way I held my wrist, or because of some imperfection in the surface, you'll end up with some low patches. And it's easier to fill the low patches in with one of these smaller knives. Sometimes I'll scrape this across this way, end up with a little glob of that stuff right there, and then just press it down, press it into one of those spaces. Or I'll use this knife around the edges, and you can also trim the edges, so to speak, so you get these globs that go over the tape. You can take this and cut them off. So if you see me using those, that's mainly what I'm doing with them. The bulk of the work is still done with this big cake frosting knife. And the other thing is, I guess I should explain what the process is. So if you were looking at this from the side, and I were doing this way, I'm holding this as flat as possible. I'm not holding it at an angle like that and scraping it on. I am, like I said earlier, like you were buttering bread or frosting a cake, trying to get as smooth and even layer as possible. If you were using a hard board instead of a canvas, you could actually put a big glob of that preparation agent in the middle, and you could work your way out. And that is somewhat easier, but people seem to be more fascinated by a flat canvas than a flat board, because the board starts out flat, and you know that it doesn't take that much to get it smooth. So you know, having a smooth canvas is something that I have been not in that many art shows thus far, but I can tell you people come up and they stare, they look, they are trying to figure out what's going on. Some have asked me, did you mount a board to the canvas, or is this on a piece of masonite, or did you paint this on a piece of glass? How did you do that? And it's really quite simple once you get the technique down. It is still time consuming, I haven't been able to shave much time off of it, but you get these paintings that almost look like they're on a surface like a drawing. And so they don't look like paintings. They have almost this glossy kind of photographic surface. Now, if you're into abstracts and whatnot, then this is not the style for you. But if you're going into traditional realism, which is different than we would say photorealism or hyperrealism, this is something we're trying to do a realistic yet still artistic kind of painting. It's you're not trying to trick somebody into thinking it's a photograph. They can look at it and still tell it's a painting, but it's got this old world kind of charm to it, like you might see from the era of the Flemish masters, where they did a lot of glazing and painted on smooth surfaces, and you can exact a high amount of detail, more so than you can when the weave is visible. And so now here we've got the second application, looking more and more smooth each time. Again, I'll probably have to do this at least 2 more times on a canvas of this size, and maybe even 4 more times. But it is all worth it in the end. I believe what I'm going to continue doing, since we've come this far, is actually go through the entire painting on this one canvas. I'm going to be painting, I believe, a little cardinal, a little red bird photograph. Look at that my mother-in-law took. And we will be going through the entire process together so you can see how I go about transferring things to the painting surface, what it takes when, as far as we mix up the paint, the mediums that I use, other tools and things of that nature, and how long this technique takes, including some of the experiments and some of the things that may not work. But I believe it'll be interesting, and I hope y'all will come back and watch as I continue. I may do a couple of more time lapses of the preparation just so y'all can see each step along the way, but it's nothing different from what we've done so far. Just another coat, let it dry, sand it down, put it on in a different direction, let it dry, sand it down, keep it up until you're ready to finally transfer your drawing or your source to it. And we'll cover that in a later session. I hope all of you have had a good holiday season, and Happy New Year to you all. Thank you very much.